Well, let's take a closer look at what's been happening at the summit. And in his speech to the gathering, US President Joe Biden praised nations as they committed to spend more on defence and strengthen military capabilities. Mr. Biden said NATO was capable of defending every inch of its territory. Well, let's go straight to my colleague Helena Humphrey, who is at that summit in the American capital for us. Well, first of all, Helena, just bring us up to date on what exactly has been discussed today.
Regini, today was the first big day of business, some high-level meetings with world leaders, NATO partner countries as well, all coming together. Significant announcement from US Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that those F-16 fighter jets will be provided by NATO allies, something Ukraine has been calling for a long time. Ukrainian pilots have been here in the United States receiving training on them. That's off the back of that announcement for Patriot missiles as well, Patriot battery systems as well as tactical air defence systems. On top of that, some key comments to watch from the likes of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who is going to be leaving the post soon on the 1st of October, saying China is the enabler of this war, specifically referencing reports of China supplying microelectronics to Russia to be used in the manufacture of weapons there, so that Russia continues its war chest, it continues to have weaponries. And then also with regards to Ukraine and its role in NATO, we know that it wants to be a member. We've heard from the Finnish president today, Alexander Stubb, saying that its position in NATO and that extension, that invitation should be one when it comes that is irreversible. And you were just talking about, this being a really big day in Washington, just talking more about that and that split screen that we've got with the NATO summit here, and then of course what we're seeing on Capitol Hill, those comments that we've been hearing from the likes of Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, influential Democrat, who says that President Biden needs to make up his mind soon whether he is staying in the race. I mean, the counterpoint to that is that President Biden has said he's adamant he is staying in the race, despite those drip, drip, drip of Democrats calling on him to step out after that debate performance, which some of them say appears to be concerning. And then just taking it one step further, US actor George Clooney, a large Democratic donor, also writing an opinion editorial saying, I love Joe Biden, but we need to have a new nominee. So I think that's also providing the backdrop to much of the conversation here. Just one point to bring you some breaking news, and that is that Joe Biden will be sitting down for another interview, this with Lester Holt, the anchor of NBC News, coming off the back of that interview that he had with ABC's George Stephanopoulos. I think it's fair to say this interview opportunity coming up at a time when no performance so far has managed to quell any of these concerns, at least among some Democrats, about his fitness for staying in the race.
OK, Helena Humphrey with all the latest on all those different angles from Washington. Thank you for the moment. And of course, we will in a moment be discussing more about President Biden and those growing calls for him to step aside. But let's stay with the NATO summit and discuss what's been agreed today. And let's speak to Anya Manuel. She's the Executive Director of the Aspen Strategy Group, a bipartisan US foreign policy forum based in DC. This is the 75th anniversary of the NATO alliance, but it comes at a time where some people are questioning the usefulness and the future of that alliance. Where do you see it fitting into the current global map at the moment?
Thanks for having me, Regini. NATO has never been more relevant or more useful. I mean, it is largely unsung, but the amount of coordination, cooperation, being on the same page, and how much aid is being provided to Ukraine really should be celebrated. I also think a really important thing is happening this week at the summit, which is that they are announcing a new command in Wiesbaden, Germany, that's going to coordinate the provision of that military equipment to Ukraine. That's really important because it future-proofs the alliance, if you will, and keeps it out of the vagaries of politics. You've all just had your election in the UK. We have one coming up in the US. The French have just had their election. And just putting that aid to Ukraine on a firmer footing is important. And as you just reported, Jens Stoltenberg, the outgoing head of NATO, talking about how increasingly relevant the alliance is in the Indo-Pacific as well.
You talk about Ukraine, and of course NATO has aspirations to become part of the alliance. How close, if at all, is Ukraine to becoming some part of it in, say, the next couple of years?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of talk in Washington about how exactly to word it as part of this summit. I don't know where they're going to come out on that, but for all intents and purposes, this alliance is defending Ukraine, and they are right to do this. This is a relatively small, the aid we're giving to Ukraine is a relatively small part of all of our defense budgets. No NATO soldiers are standing in harm's way. The Ukrainians are fighting valiantly, and they're doing real damage to the Russians. It's a very formidable opponent, but we need to make sure that Ukraine stays in the fight and that Russia is ultimately defeated.
Anya, let's zoom out a bit and look again at the future of NATO. It could be that Donald Trump re-enters the White House. Of course, we don't know until November and that election. But Mr. Trump has been less than favourable about NATO, and in the past has even threatened to pull the US out of the alliance. How much is this summit all about sort of future-proofing the alliance for that possibility?
I'm not sure how much it is about President Trump or potential President Trump, but they are certainly future-proofing the alliance, and they are right to do so. I think every American president realizes once they get into office how important it is to have friends and allies. It is a dangerous world out there. Great powers are acting badly. By that, I mean mostly the Russians, also the Chinese, Iranians, and others. And one of the best things we have going from a U.S. perspective is that we have so many friends and allies in the fight. I run a big conference that's happening next week in Aspen, where we're going to be talking about all of these issues. We're going to have Secure Cavoli, many from the U.S. and international stage. And I think people affirm its importance.
Okay, thank you so much, Anya Manuel. We've run out of time, but thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that ongoing NATO summit. And a quick mention, of course, there's plenty more on that summit on the BBC News website.